front now, Terry Austin, a former trial attorney who has been in the courtroom there every day for this case. We're also joined by criminal defense attorney Mark O'Mara and Yoraba Richin. She is the co-director of the investigation discovery docuseries The Fall. Max, and of course Warner Brothers Discovery is the parent company of both networks as well as CNN. Mark, how surprised are you that the judge is keeping Combs in prison?
I am surprised. He was only convicted of the two, quote, lesser charges, like was just said, the least of the two of the five. And I thought that he was going to let him go home because he's been in jail for a while. And the idea that the judge has made a decision to keep him in is also quite telling, because we know that he's facing a couple of years, somewhere between 12 and 24 months for the charges he was convicted of. And now that we know that there's this concept that the judge can consider sentencing called relevant conduct, which means other acts that he was not convicted of, other acts he may not even been charged of, which are going to be considered by the judge in sentencing. And as the judge said today, his very own defense attorney said he was violent. That's one of the conditions or one of the considerations if you're going to keep him in. So I was surprised. I thought he'd get out, but it is sort of some insight into the way the judge is looking at Mr. Combs.
Yeah, and Terry Combs facing, it's a max of 10 years for both counts that he's convicted of. He is a first-time offender, already spent those 10 months behind bars that Mark is talking about there. What do you think the sentence is going to be?
Well, it's interesting because I do think the judge is very careful and he considers everything, and I think he'll be careful with the sentencing as well. It is a maximum of 10. The judge has the option to do either consecutive or concurrent. I'm thinking that he'll do the concurrent, so that would be the maximum. And also, the request from both the prosecution and the defense is much lower than that. So I'm thinking he'll probably maybe split it. I think 50-some months was what the prosecution was asking versus much less than that from the defense, some 21 months, I think it was. And so maybe the judge will go down the middle as far as that's concerned. He did mention that he wants to get that pre-sentencing report from the probation department, and Ivanhoe, who is the lead attorney here, he made a great argument for that bail, but he did say once he lost that argument that he wanted to expedite the sentencing. So I think we will have a word at some point that the sentencing will come before the October 3rd date, which was the original date that the judge gave.
Yoraba, you talked to so many people for your documentary who knew Combs or they were part of his inner circle, and I know you say that you're already hearing from some of them after the verdict. How are they feeling?
Well, I would say that the people who participated in our series, some of who testified at the trial, there is a feeling of shock for some, disbelief and resignation, but also going to the bail issue, a feeling of fear that, that this is a man who they allege had been physically violent towards them. One of the people who participated in our series posted on Instagram, Jordan, the chef, she, really pleaded with the judge not to let him out on bond because of her experience, her alleged experience with him being violent. And I think, it makes sense that he wouldn't, as the judge pointed out, his own defense attorney said he was violent. So our participants, they are definitely some of them have definitely expressed fear about the possibility of Combs being released.
Yeah, I mean, Mark, as Yoraba says there, the judge used the defense's own words against them to defend not granting Combs bail. It was a weapon against them today, but how instrumental was it in court admitting that, yeah, this guy was violent, but it wasn't racketeering, it wasn't sex trafficking? How far did that go to convince the jury, do you think?
I think it went very well, because you do have to own up to what you know the government is going to be able to prove, because you want to maintain that credibility with the jury, not just as the defense attorney, but as the defendant, as the client. And I think the idea of saying and acknowledging, we will admit to this, but this over here, absolutely not. And obviously it worked, because the jury was not convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that he was guilty of the more serious charges. And you have to give credit where it's due. even though a few words were used against him to keep him in today, overall, the defense did a great job presenting what they needed to present to acknowledge what did happen, those two minor charges, but to avoid the most significant charges. So it is sort of hats off to the defense team.
I would also just jump in and say another reaction that one of our participants had is really wondering why some other folks were not called who could speak to the racketeering charge. That was a question that they had. So I think people are going to be, wondering that as well, because seemingly there were other people that could have spoke to the racketeering charge who, for whatever reason, were not called, and people are wondering why.
Yeah, a question a number of people may be asking, and Terry, you think the prosecution hurt its case by bringing that racketeering charge. Talk about that, and if they could have helped by bringing more people.
Well, I do think that bringing the racketeering was a stretch. They did not have that conspiracy. They did not have that agreement. And yes, they could have brought the chief of staff. Her name was Christina Coram. They could have brought the head of security, D-Rock. They could have brought these people in. I think one of the reasons they did not do that is because they might be difficult witnesses on that stand. So they were trying to prove it through text messages. They were trying to prove it through emails, just those individuals consenting to what was going on. But they lacked the agreement, they lacked the conspiracy. So I do think it hurt them as far as their credibility is concerned. And I do think for that sex trafficking, they might have said, look, you overreached on the RICO, there was no sex trafficking. I don't think they had an option with the Mann Act. There were escorts, they were transported interstate, they were paid, and there was definitely sexual activity, commercial sexual activity. And so I think the jury listened to the law in that regard. Frankly, I think they did a really good job. They paid close attention, and the judge profusely thanked them for their service.
Yorba, Combs rose to stardom in the world of hip-hop music. Do you think that the industry is going to welcome him back after today's verdicts, after all of this testimony and the video? And how much do you think this case has tainted his legacy?
Yeah, that's one thing that we talked a lot about on the series with people who had known him and worked for him for years. Combs is somebody who has had a lot of lives, a lot of legal issues, allegations of violence on trial from his earliest days to the trial, the shooting trial in '99, to the beat up that he gave to Steve Stout, an executive. And he's always come back in some way. It's a real question if and how he'll come back from this. But there were people who never stopped being on his side and never stopped supporting him. So certainly, I think there'll be a faction of those people. And we'll see what kind of comeback he tries. We've seen now in all parts of our culture, politics, sports, the comeback happens, is attempted, and I'd be surprised if it wasn't here. And it's a real question of will he be welcomed back? I think some factions will welcome him back.
Thank you all so much for the conversation tonight. Really appreciate it. And